It was a very interesting experience for me to dig a site which is connected directly into Jesus' life, Jesus' movement, and the expectation of the world, of the Christian world, to find something from Jesus' time. That was a new experience for me.
The shovel cracked against something hard beneath 2 meters of waterlogged earth. Dr. Mordecai Aviam scrambled to his knees in the flooded trench, clawing through centuries of compacted silt with nothing but his bare fingers. What surfaced wasn't pottery, it wasn't bone. It was a floor, a mosaic floor, and woven into its colored tiles were Greek letters that no living person had read in over 1,500 years. But that's not what sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. When imaging specialists finally decoded the innermost ring of text, letters deliberately carved so shallow they were nearly invisible to the naked eye, they found something that shouldn't exist. A direct quotation. Words placed in the mouth of Jesus Christ himself. Words that appear in no gospel, no manuscript, no scripture ever assembled in the history of Christianity. And the message? It wasn't a blessing, it wasn't a parable, it was a command. Urgent, cryptic, and deeply unsettling. A directive to guard something against a threat the inscription never identifies. Something so sensitive that the Byzantine builders who laid this floor seemed to want it hidden from anyone who didn't already know where to look. So, what did those missing words actually say? Why were they buried? And why does this discovery feel less like a breakthrough, and more like a door that was never meant to be opened? This wasn't Jerusalem. It wasn't Nazareth. It wasn't Rome. This was Bethsaida, and if you know your New Testament, that name alone should raise every alarm in your body. Bethsaida was the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip, 3 of the most consequential figures in Christian history. This was the village where Jesus healed a blind man by pressing mud against his eyes. The plain outside its walls is where he fed 5,000 people from 5 loaves and 2 fish. For all practical purposes, Bethsaida served as the operational nerve center of Jesus' entire Galilean ministry. More miracles were performed in and around this village than almost anywhere else recorded in Scripture. And yet, and this is where the story turns dark, Bethsaida was one of only 3 cities that Jesus publicly condemned. In the Gospel of Matthew, he turns toward this village and pronounces a curse. Woe to you, Bethsaida! If these same miracles had been performed in the pagan cities of Tyre and Sidon, even those people would have repented. But Bethsaida saw everything and believed nothing. Jesus warned that on the day of judgment, this city would be cast down to Hades itself. Now, here's where it gets genuinely chilling, because what happened next looks less like metaphor and more like prophecy carried out with surgical precision. By the 3rd century, references to Bethsaida vanished from Roman records. Travelers couldn't locate it. Mapmakers stopped drawing it. The Sea of Galilee rose, the shoreline shifted, and the earth literally swallowed Bethsaida whole, burying it under meters of silt and sediment as if the land itself was carrying out a sentence. For nearly 2,000 years, the city was so thoroughly erased that scholars couldn't even agree on whether it had been real. 2 competing archaeological sites, decades of bitter academic warfare, careers staked and destroyed over the argument. And then, in 2016, everything changed. Professor R. Stephen Notley and Dr. Mordecai Aviam launched excavations at a flooded site called El Araj on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Conditions were brutal. Summer temperatures above 100 degrees, a team of 28 rotating shifts, and industrial pumps running day and night to hold back rising groundwater. Every meter they dug, the lake pushed back, as though something beneath that soil did not want to be disturbed. For 3 full excavation seasons, the site produced little more than Roman-era pottery and endless mud. Critics pounced. The skeptics declared El Araj a dead end. Then, in 2019, a volunteer's trowel struck something solid at nearly 2 meters below the surface. Dr. Aviam was at the trench within minutes. The construction quality, he later reported, was unlike anything else at the site. What emerged from the earth were walls nearly a meter thick, built from carefully dressed stone. Architecture designed not just to shelter, but to endure for centuries. And then came the detail that made the entire team stop cold: the unmistakable curve of an apse. A semicircular altar space, the signature of a Christian church. Carbon dating placed the structure between 450 and 500 CE, the Byzantine period. But here's the detail that transformed this from interesting to historic. When the team dug beneath the church floor, they discovered something far older. First-century Roman structures, fishermen's dwellings, lead net weights, iron hooks, coins struck during the exact decades when Jesus walked these shores. The Byzantine builders hadn't placed their church at random. They had centered it with obsessive precision directly over one specific house. Not the biggest dwelling, not the most convenient plot of land. One particular home they clearly believed mattered more than any other. As Professor Notley explained, in the ancient world, nobody erects a massive basilica on unstable, flood-prone ground over an ordinary fisherman's hut. They did it because they were certain this was the house of the Apostle Peter. They had even built reinforced walls around the original room, preserving its dimensions like a sacred relic sealed inside a monument. But the church itself wasn't the real discovery. The real discovery was what they found embedded in its floor. Conservators spent months on their hands and knees, removing centuries of hardened sediment grain by grain. Slowly, Greek letters began materializing from the colored tiles, 127 characters total, arranged in formal Byzantine script. The outer inscription opened with standard dedicatory language. It named a donor called Constantine, described as a servant of Christ, and referenced a bishop. Routine stuff for a church of this era. But then the text shifted dramatically. The inscription referenced Peter, and not casually. It called him the chief and commander of the heavenly apostles. Dr. Aviam recognized the explosive significance immediately. That specific Greek phrasing carries enormous doctrinal weight. It doesn't merely honor Peter. It establishes supreme authority, a clear hierarchy, a chain of command among the apostles themselves. This was not a generic tribute. This was a declaration. And yet, the truly unsettling part hadn't surfaced yet. The team realized the inscription wasn't a single block of text. It was enclosed within a circular medallion, a round frame roughly 45 centimeters in diameter. And inside that border, beneath centuries of foot traffic and sediment, were additional letters, smaller, shallower, carved with such delicacy they were practically invisible. As though whoever placed them there wanted only those who already knew the secret to find it. The researchers brought in infrared imaging equipment. When the processed scans appeared on the monitor, silence fell over the tent. 43 additional Greek characters materialized, a quotation formatted as direct speech, words attributed to Jesus himself. And here's the part that should make you deeply uncomfortable. The text didn't match any known manuscript of the New Testament. Not Matthew, not Mark, not Luke, not John. These were words no canonical gospel ever recorded. Words that Christianity, for 15 centuries, either lost or deliberately chose not to preserve. Character by character, the linguists reconstructed the fragmented inner ring. The translation read, "Guard my house, for I go to prepare the heavens." Let those words settle for a moment. Guard my house. In the Gospel of John, Jesus tells Peter to feed my sheep. In Matthew, he calls Peter the rock upon which the church would be built. But nowhere, in any canonical gospel, in any accepted manuscript, does Jesus ever instruct Peter to guard his house. That command does not exist in the Bible. And then there's the second half. For I go to prepare the heavens. If you know your scripture, that phrase should sound familiar, but wrong. John chapter 14 contains a similar verse where Jesus tells his disciples he goes to prepare a place for them. But the wording on this mosaic is different. The canonical version speaks of preparing a place. This inscription speaks of preparing the heavens themselves, not a room in the Father's house, but the entire cosmic architecture of eternity. Professor Notley weighed in carefully. The distinction implies a division of cosmic responsibility. Jesus departs to reshape eternity itself. Peter remains behind to guard something that cannot, under any circumstances, be left unattended. But guard what exactly, and from whom? Remember where this inscription was found. The mosaic was laid inside a church built directly over Peter's physical home. The Byzantine Christians chose this spot because they believed it held a significance that the gospel writers either couldn't or wouldn't put into writing. Scholars who study early Christianity recognize a category called agrapha, sayings attributed to Jesus that survived outside the biblical canon. Over 200 such sayings have been identified across ancient manuscripts and archaeological finds. Even the Bible acknowledges their existence. In Acts, Paul quotes Jesus saying, "It is more blessed to give than to receive," a phrase nowhere in the four Gospels. The Gospel of John closes by admitting that if everything Jesus said and did were written down, the world itself could not contain the books. Finding one of these sayings carved permanently into the floor of a major pilgrimage church, built by people who trace their heritage directly back to the apostles, gives it a weight that paper manuscripts cannot match. This community didn't learn about Peter from a book. They claimed a direct, unbroken chain of memory stretching back to the man himself. Not everyone agrees. Dr. Craig Evans, a respected New Testament scholar who wasn't involved in the excavation, urged caution. Byzantine inscriptions, he argued, frequently embellished existing traditions. What looks like a preserved memory could just as easily be a theological development, a community projecting its own beliefs backward onto sacred authority. It's a fair point, except it doesn't explain one critical detail. Why hide it? If this inscription was simple embellishment, a community adding poetic flair to honor their most famous resident, why carve the inner letters so shallow they'd be nearly invisible? Embellishment is meant to be seen. It's meant to impress pilgrims and attract donors. You don't hide embellishment beneath the feet of worshippers who'll never know it's there. You hide something because you believe it's dangerous. The inscription suggests the people of Bethsaida remembered something the official record deliberately excluded, and they feared what would happen if it became widely known, but equally feared what would happen if it was lost entirely. So they split the difference. They sealed it into stone, invisible to everyone except those who already carried the secret. If we take the inscription at face value, Jesus told Peter to stand guard over something at this exact location, and Peter's spiritual descendants maintained that vigil through the curse, through the city's destruction, through centuries of abandonment and imperial collapse. They preserved the location in secret until Christianity became Rome's official religion. Then they marked it with a basilica and sealed a warning into the floor that would survive even if the building didn't. What were they protecting? And what were they protecting it from? Here's what makes this story far from over. The 2019 excavation uncovered only about 40% of the church floor. Additional mosaic sections remain buried, including areas near the altar, where inscriptions traditionally carried the most significant content. "Guard my house" may have been the opening line of a much longer command. Consider what we know. a mosaic floor buried nearly 2 meters below the surface, preserved by the same floods that erased Bethsaida from memory. A message hidden in plain sight for 15 centuries. Words attributed to Jesus that no gospel writer recorded, or perhaps was permitted to record. And consider what we don't know. What's written on the other 60% of that floor? What lies beneath the altar stone? Professor Notley put it simply: we've found something the ancient church considered important enough to preserve through 15 centuries of silence. The question isn't whether it matters. The question is what else they buried. So, here's the thought that should keep you up tonight. If the people who actually knew Peter, who inherited his instructions through an unbroken chain of memory, believed this location required permanent guardianship sealed in hidden stone, what exactly were they guarding the world from? And if that message has now surfaced after 2,000 years of silence, are we certain we were supposed to find it?